With Blazor components, you may be asking yourself, okay, what is a component? So if you're new to this, you may wonder what it is. It's really reusable UI building blocks, which means that we're going to build all of our UI componentry with this component stuff inside of Blazor. So anytime I'm building a page, it's a UI component. Anytime I'm building anything, it's a component, and inside this component consists of 4 or 5 things. Number one, it's HTML markup, and you'll see when I'm putting this together, it's standard HTML markup, which is kind of diversion. If you're looking at React components and how those are put together, it's not magic strings or anything like that. You can use the editor to mark up your code with just pure HTML with some razors sprinkled in, and we'll get into that. It also has CSS, and we're going to talk about that too, where each component has its own CSS file, and this is called CSS isolation, which means that the CS that we put into our components only affect the component. This is a very rich feature to allow the components to behave properly when you're designing them, make them look correctly, because you can have a CSS style sheet that can't be changed with other style sheets that could be in the project.
I'm assuming,
Then it's
well, a
also,
question about that. I'm assuming global
yeah,
style still applies on that, right? Like it's
yeah,
more
global styles.
specificity, right? And hence cascading,
Yeah.
right?
So what happens here when you're creating the CSS is that it puts a an identifier inside an attribute on all the CSS that's in this component, and then you have to select it specifically for you to be able to access it. So
Okay.
that's why you put it in isolation, so that, for example, if you had an ID on a page called results in your component, and then you had an ID somewhere else on the same page, those could be selected separately
Okay.
because there's an attribute that says this is part of a component that it does at runtime. So when it compiles a new style sheet, pushes it into the main style sheet, but they're all attributed out so that they can only be selected inside the component,
And
and
we'll
that's
see that in your
kind of
demo
powerful.
here, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, and we'll
Okay.
look at it.
Cool.
The other thing that we're not going to show today, but we also can do the same thing with JavaScript. I haven't had, honestly, I haven't tried this a whole lot. And when I have tried, it's been a little bit unsuccessful. So I'm doing something wrong there. But you can isolate JS code as well inside the components so that if you have code or variables or anything declared inside of JavaScript that you don't want to be stepped on with other things, you can you can put that inside your component. So your component can ride with everything that it needs to function and look great. Now, there's 5 main types of components. The first one is the app component. Now, think of your app component is going to contain the base HTML page. It's going to contain the HTML tag and the body tag, and every component that you build will be inserted into the app component. So if you've built things before with HTML and you're kind of injecting things in an HTML page, whether using React or Angular, this is what this does. But it is a component. And this is very important that everything inside of Blazor is a component. Now, you also have a router component. And so this controls how to discover routes for web apps. And this is out of the box, really simple to do comparatively to other frameworks out there. This makes the routing really, really simple. And you just give it a route and then it listens on that route. It's pretty cool. So you can have slash home or slash about or slash index, and you just declare it at the top of your page. All right. We also have a layout component. Now, think of layout components as things that you want to repeat over the pages. So let's say like a nav bar, and you want your nav bar on the top of every page, and you want your footer at the bottom of every page. You push that into a layout component. Now, you have to have an app component, you have to have a router component, and pretty much you have to have a layout component. Even though if you don't even have nav bars or footers, you can make a blank layout component for things like landing pages and things like that. So, and each page can specify what layout component it wants to behave in. So you can have more than one layout. If you have, for example, if you go over to an admin area and that has a nav bar and footer element, you can have a layout for that. But you have a user-facing app that has a different set of nav bars and elements, and so you can have multiple layouts or just one. Then we have something called a page component. Now, a page component declares a route at the top of it, and that makes it available to be responded to. So that means I could type in the route in the browser bar, and that page will respond. Now, a page is injected into a layout, and a layout is injected into an app. Okay, how it works. And then finally is what I call UI components. And these are custom components that we're going to build. Think of them like building blocks. So let's say that I need to build a custom component that I want to just run and put it on a page whenever I want to. And you put these in like new HTML tags. So think of this, what we're going to show you today is a component like a pop-up that gets me to sign up for an HTML page. Now, you might be thinking, why would you make that a component? Because I was registering for the Wall Street Journal yesterday, Kevin.
Okay.
And when I was doing it,
Paying for that now?
I'm not now, because I'm going to tell you why I didn't. But they had, I think it was 6 pop-ups after I registered that came up and says, "Hey, do you want this?" And I was like, "No, I don't want that." "Well, how about this?" "No, I don't want that." "Well, how about this?" "No, I don't want that either." And it was like 4 or 5, maybe 6, like these pop-up components wanting me to enter information or register or something like that. And that's really the genesis for this demo, because like, wow, if I had to build that, I would make a custom component and just change the message. And that's what we're going to do. All right. To show you how we could build a real simple component, but then we could use it on any page we want without having to know anything about the component, which is pretty powerful.
Okay, so what's another example of a component too then? Because we're going to use it as a pop-up, right? Or like a little pop-up. But could it be like a section on a page too? Is that?
Yeah, it could be a section. I think another good example would be if you were building, say, a news site. You're building CNN or Fox News or MSNBC News or whatever it is, and you want comments on the bottom of each article. So you would build a comment component that would be injected on the page at the bottom of each article, but it would be custom to that page that it's on. So it's aware of the page it's on. So you show the right comments, and you can do that either through parameters or code or whatever it is. And I'm going to show you how to pass parameters into these components so that we can modify them at runtime. And it doesn't have to be everything at design time. And that's what makes it powerful. Cool. Now, what's great about Blazor is from the ground up, this is a component first framework. Everything that's going on today in the other frameworks is we're tacking components onto these other frameworks, and they're not super well integrated. Like, well, this is how you do it. And they always have some magic string or some kind of complex syntax, whether that be Angular, whether that even in current MVC, if we're building like partials, it's kind of problematic. Well, Blazor takes a different approach, and they're saying, well, what if we made everything a component? And therefore, the entire framework is built on components. And everything you build in Blazor is a component. Every page is a component. Every layout's a component. The app is a component. The routes are a component. Your nav bar is a component. Everything's a component. So it just works when you put them on a page. And the components are clean, which what I mean by that is use standard HTML markup to do it, standard C# code to do it. There's no like kind of like cryptic syntax to do this. So they're fairly easy to build once you understand how to do it. And then components can execute. And this is what's cool. Components can execute server side or client side. And realistically, it'll be both. And what I'm going to show you is a server and client side, the same component that can execute on either side depending on the render mode. And that's where render mode auto comes in for Blazor. And that's what we're so excited about. Is because I don't have to build these 2 components that do the same thing, but they behave different. Therefore, I've got to do it this way for server, this way for client. And then I got to figure out where does this execute and where does it run? I don't have to do any of that. I just build my component, I give it a render mode, and then Blazor takes care of the rest, executes it where it needs to execute. And I don't have to figure that out. Pretty powerful. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to build. So this is a pop-up here, and I'm going to click off this here. And notice here, I've got this landing page here. Never give up on your dreams, learn to master your life, mind, and career. So let's say that we're making, a website for Tony Robbins or some kind of motivational speaker, something like that. You know, so when me and Kevin retire from Coder Foundry, this is what we'll do. We'll give TED Talks every week, you know. But if I refresh this, it's going to go through the refresh page, and then after a minute, it'll come up here and say, hey, would you like to sign up for our mailing list? And you've seen this on every site that you ever go to anymore. Now, what you may not know is these are called CTAs, or call to actions. And if you've never had to build a commercial site before, you may have, as in case of Wall Street Journal, 6 or 7 of these things. They just happen to put them all on the same page. But you may have different sections of your site that would ask you to enter in information. And I can tell you from Coder Foundry's perspective, we do this. We have a pop-up that says, hey, do you want a syllabus? We have a pop that's, hey, do you want the 5 steps to get in a job? You know, and I think we have 2 or 3. Yeah. We don't put them all on one page, but you have separate pages that are showing similar pop-ups. And so to do this, you would need a component that you can modify. And then so I'm going to show you today how we could modify this text here through parameters. But if you take it one step further, and you'll get the code here, you could enhance what I have today to maybe change the picture, even change this form. There's a lot you could do with this. And I'm just going to show you the simple one here of changing this, what I call this heading and this subheading here, to make it flexible so we can put it on different places of our site. All right, so that's what we're going to build. So let's get after it.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. So what I thought I would do is, this is Visual Studio, the latest preview that came out on Tuesday. So, and this, I want to go walk you through kind of the project structure that I currently have. And probably in November or January, we'll be releasing a video on like what our preferred architecture is to building out Blazor apps, because it's really up in the air of how you do it. And it doesn't really matter really how you do it. It's just that if you have common pages or common folder structure where you're organizing your code, it makes it easy to go from project to project. And so in here, you're going to see this one project here is called a server-side project. This is Blazor component demo here. And then over here, we have our client project. And this client project runs in WebAssembly. You can see here that it's saying that it's going to run in WebAssembly. All right. Now they're named the same with .client, and that's important. And then in here, we have pages inside of our client component here. Now notice here in this particular project, I've got some other pages in here, but I have an error page, and that's it. And so my client side pages run here. All right. So if I look at this right here, home, you can see here I have page right here. And this is how you do routing in Blazor. You just give it an @page attribute and type in / in the name of the route you want. And just a / by itself denotes that this is the default route. Now this is discoverable at compile time, so you can't like have 2 things with the same route or anything like that. So it's well thought out, but it makes it easy to do. If you've ever had to build routing for other frameworks, you know, it's kind of magical how it works. This is, if you build a page, if you put a @page on it, this turns this component into a page, and now it's routable. And here, the attribute here is saying, how do we want this to run? Do we want it to run on server? Do we want it to run on the client? And in this case, we're saying render mode interactive auto. And this is brand new to RC2. So if you've been looking at Blazor over the last year, this is a new way that they're naming it. They're coming in with what they're going to name it. And this is interactive auto, which means that it'll either run Signal R at first and then convert over to WebAssembly as WebAssembly downloads. Now, one of the downsides that people talk about is WebAssembly can have a startup problem with it, where when you start it up, it may take a second for it to download and start up. I don't think that's as big a deal as everyone makes it out to be, but if that's a concern, you can put this as auto mode and your page will come up right away. And then in the background, it downloads the bits that it needs for WebAssembly. And then the next request to this homepage, it'll run client side. But either way, whether this is running on the server or on the client, our code doesn't change. And that's pretty cool. All right. So this is going to be your standard layout. You're going to have some server side things and you're going to have some client side things, and you'll decide which of my apps or which of my pages I want to run where. Now, one thing that it does support well is just completely static pages where we don't have to make it any render mode, and it just returns the HTML. So that's supported here as well. And we're just a static render mode. Pretty cool. All right. So let's look through a couple of things that's important that you'll need to know. I mentioned that we have this base component called app. And this is app Blazor, and this needs to be in every Blazor application. And if you look through here, this is my HTML tag right here, my head tag. And this is where I'm going to add in things that I want in my page. And you can see here, I've added in some fonts, and I've got Bootstrap linked in here, and I've got Bootstrap icons linked in here. So there's nothing magic about this. It's really a standard HTML page that behaves like any other HTML page that you've been building. It's just in this component. But you can see here, this is standard HTML markup, no magic strings. I'm not having to put things together. And you can see here in green in Visual Studio, it has some specialized components in here. And let's look at this one. This is called routes. If I click over here to the route component, this is how it knows how to find pages. Okay. And so if it has an at page attribute, this component takes care of that. And if it doesn't find it, it'll show you, hey, a 404, and also gives us the default layout. And we can override this layout on a page by page basis, but we don't want to type in, oh, the layout for this page is that. We can just say, okay, for all the routes, inject the layout into this page unless you tell me something else. Okay. And
this all of this standard, right? This is just
standard, out of the box, just works. And I can't tell you how simple this is to do. It is this simple. And so if I look at my layouts here, and I put these in a folder here, and you can have one to many of these, and you can see here, here's my layout, and it's just simple HTML. Now with a layout component, you got to have inherits layout component base, so it knows to be injected, and that's the only magic you have to do. And in here, standard HTML, and you can see this footer is going to be injected at the bottom of every page. And now also have a component here that's nested inside this component called top nav menu. And so that's pretty powerful that we can nest components as well. And so here, if I have my top nav menu here, you can see this is nothing but HTML. That's all it is. And so this is a Bootstrap menu. This could be, for example, if someone's asking this, can you use Tailwind with Blazor? And I tell people all the time, it's just HTML and CSS. You can use any CSS framework you want. You can roll your own. You don't have to use Bootstrap. You can use Tailwind, or you can just use something that your company's been using for 20 years, you know, your own CSS library. And so whatever you do, you just mark it up how you normally would build a page, just like you would if you were building it in VS Code or whatever. It just runs in here, and then you have your code block. Now, none of these have any kind of code behind, but it begs to tell you that, hey, if you have something complicated in my layout and I need to do things based on a user, or I need to do things based on an area, or I need to do things based on security, I now have the code to do that and modify this nav menu like I want. So pretty cool. So that's an overview of how this works. So let's go over to our home page here, and let's look at our home page, and we're going to build our component right off the bat here. So I'm going to close out the server project here. I'm just going to go into client demo here, and I'm going to look at this page here. And you can see I just have some divs in here, and inside of here I have some CSS. And you can notice here that this CSS is attached to this Razor markup page. And boom, that's the CSS for this component. I even have some really complicated media queries in here that allow me to change the way this looks based on the size of the viewport. And what we're going to show you in a project coming soon is we're going to use something even more powerful than this, where we look at viewport queries. And so that we can, instead of just doing a media query, we can do other types of queries here to really dial this in. So if I run this, I'm going to show you how the CSS gets kind of put together. So I'm going to make this big here so we can see it. And you can see it modified at my media query, changed the location of this. Kind of cool. Based on where you're at. And this is all done through CSS. So if we look at, and we just inspect the page here, and hopefully you can see this.
Kind of small.
A little bit small, but we can look at the style sheets here. I'm going to scroll up here and look around here, and you'll see down, if I go down here far enough, you can see where it's adding in some attributes here to my CSS. It's pretty powerful. And this makes it so that when I look in here, and we'll get right down into my container, the button in here, brand, let me get down into the main here. And you can see right here it says main B-IR4. It's tagged this at runtime to know that this is part of this component in here, and there any CSS has to be referenced with this tag here. And that's how isolation kind of works. It's basically changing it at runtime so that you can't select it. And you can see it's putting these tags on all of these. Pretty cool, right? And so you have to use this attribute to select class main title has to have this attribute here. And then we put this attribute also inside the style sheet, right? So that's kind of how isolation works. We'll probably cover that more in our courses about more detail, but in general, it's making each element unique in the component. So therefore it can be selected uniquely through specificity selection with CSS. It's really not making anything new. It just says, oh, this thing has a new name, and I need to use that name when I want to verify. I want to look at the main title class here. I got to use BG4Z65, whatever it comes up with. All right. Okay, so let's build our first component here. I'm going to stop this, and let's build our very first component. And so I'm going to come into Blazor component because I'm going to get this component to run on the client. And so I'm going to add a new folder here. And this is kind of what we're going to do in our architecture. And we're going to call this folder components. So this for us is UI components that aren't pages. These are building blocks. And so while we could put it in the pages folder, they're not really pages. So we're making a little bit of a separation from that. Okay. All right. And then I'm going to add a new Blazor component. And I'm going to call it newsletter CTA. This stands for newsletter, sign up from a newsletter. CTA stands for call to action. You can name these whatever you want. There's no magic names to these, but once you name it, that's how we're going to reference it throughout the code. And we'll click add here. And so it's added a brand new component, and you can see right here, it made me a code block, and it made a newsletter H3 tag. Okay. But what I want to be able to do is turn this into a pop-up. So we'll start off simple. I've got some HTML here because typing HTML, according to Kevin, is like watching paint dry. So we won't do that to you.
We can explain it, but watching someone type it is like, I'd rather see the code and the fun bits.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is I'm going to put a standard modal in here straight from the Bootstrap docs. Again, you could have used the HTML dialog. You could have used almost any control that you want to use. I'm using Bootstrap for this. And the reason I'm using Bootstrap is because when I do this, in order for this to pop up, I need to use JavaScript to do that. And I want to show you that we can call JavaScript components from within Blazor using something called interop. And I want to dispel the myth of doing this because a lot of people say that this is a weakness of the platform. And it's really hard to do and you'll never figure it out and it kind of sucks. And I'm going to show you that it's not that bad and actually kind of works pretty well. Okay. So I've got a component here, and notice here it's not a page. Okay, so that's good, and it just sits on this page here. Right now, I do need to add an attribute here because I need to tell it where to run. So I'm going to add my attribute here. Then you put a square brackets here, and it'll say render interactive mode auto. So that's what we're going to do. That's how you turn this component, Kevin, into a component that runs on the server or in WebAssembly. That's it. That's what it does. So
that's giving you no choice of those two, right?
Yeah, and it does it automatically, and we don't have to go wire up anything else or have another file or anything like this. At compile time, it'll figure this out and tell it where to run. It's kind of cool. That's about all you have to do that. All right. Okay. So now that I've got this built, what I want to do, this is a component. It's not a full page. I want to attach this to my page here. So I'm going to go over here to my home page here, and I want to put my modal right here on the page here, which is pretty cool. Now, what you don't know or may not know if you've never used modals before is modals have to exist on the page that they're in. They're just invisible to start off with, and you have to trigger it through some kind of action to make it pop up. But they're in the page itself. They're in the markup of itself. And this is why components can be so powerful, because what if you had to redo this modal on like 8 or 9 different pages of your website? And what do you do when you want to change that? And this is where components come in, where we can make this reusable. If we can change it in one place, it impacts all the pages where it's inserted. And that's powerful.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm going to add this here. Now, to do this, we got to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to say using, and I'm going to say Blazor component. That's the name of my project. And I need to say client. That's the project that I'm in, Blazor component.demo.client. And then I'm going to tell it folder I'm looking for. Now, they have a fancy name for this. It's called a namespace. Namespace tells us that, okay, for the types in this folder in here, Blazor.client, what can I see? All right. And so now, once I do that, watch this. This is cool. I can get in like an HTML tag.
Oh.
And that's that component right there, the one we just made. And that's how we add it to a page. That injects that
component then into that page.
Yep. And it'll do it at runtime. All right. And because this is a pop-up, we need to trigger some code to pop it up. But if we run it right now, it won't show. And it shouldn't show.
Right.
All right. Which is okay. So I'm going to run it again just to show you kind of like how this works. So the page came up. And this is the other nice thing, if you haven't used Visual Studio before, is that we have an IDE, a web server, and everything right here in the box. And it makes development local to my machine, and also can publish it out to servers or whatever. So it makes it real simple for you to develop, and you can be real productive. Now, they do have some stuff with hot reload here, that as I make changes in hot reload, this will work. I've noticed that since this came out on Tuesday, that's been kind of buggy, honestly, but they'll figure it out because it was working pretty well the release before. So it could be either something to do with that I'm running ARM Windows and ARM.NET on a Mac in parallels.
Right, to make it real complex.
To make it complex. And so maybe this works great on just a Windows machine. But also too, that when you're in previews, you kind of expect that, that it's going to kind of work. So we'll try hot reload today. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. Okay. So you notice that nothing's in here, but if I go look at my page source here, and I make this a little bigger, you can see that it injected it right there into the page here. There is our modal injected right in here. Class modal fade, CTA modal right there. It's injected into the page. It was that simple. So this could have been a comment. This could be, your tags if you're running a blog. It could be some side navigation, a different section, whatever it is. your favorite component would be like the ad display, where we show you ads on the side, Kevin.
Oh yeah, I
Where you
love
buy,
those. Oh, I
yeah, you
love
got to buy
those.
a car or the TV sets you're looking at.
Robot dog, one that
Like
follows me around.
robot dog, whatever you show in there. So those are components as well. And so really easy for us to do it. Now let's use JavaScript, our next step. So what we've gone through is how do we build components? I just built one with HTML. Hopefully you'll see that's really easy to do. How do we add the components to other pages, basically nested them? That's what we did here. And now this component requires that we use JavaScript. Okay. And so we want to use JavaScript to invoke this to pop up. All right. Now I've already written some code here in this project here, and I'm going to show you where it is. And this is, I haven't got to work yet. I'm not exactly sure why, but according to the docs, you have to say window.show newsletter modal makes this anonymous function. And then in here, we write our code. Now, what seems to work just fine is if I call other things inside of the browser, like local storage or things that built in the browser, it works just fine. So I haven't seen anything that doesn't work. But if you're writing your own custom function, vanilla JS, currently right now, this is the way you declare it. And maybe that's a weakness in it, or maybe there's something else that I haven't got into yet. Now, as I learn more about this and write more apps, we'll get into it. But currently right now, according to the docs, this is the way you got to write it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use document.getElementID and call this bootstrap function. And this is in the bootstrap JS here, new bootstrap modal. And then I tell it what modal by getting the ID from it. And this declares a modal. And then I'm just going to say, okay, now show that. Now notice that this is a bootstrap method call here. So we're calling into another JS library to show it. And that's why I wanted to show you this, is not only am I writing my custom function, but inside my custom function, I'm calling into a third-party JS library. Okay. Now, how this is all linked up is if you look at our app CS, or our app Razor, you can see here down at the bottom, and I've got my web.js in here, and I need to add the JS that I want to run in here. So let's do that real quick. And just copy some code here. I'm going to put 2 lines of code in here that we can do. And I'm going to put this right before here. So what I've done here is I've pulled in the bootstrap JS, because we need JS for popping the modals and other components in there. And then this is my custom JS right here. Notice it's the folder and the name, just like you would link any other JavaScript file. Now, here's the thing that will drive you crazy if you're doing this, and this just comes from experimentation, is that when they show you this in the docs, they're putting these after the Blazor web.js here, and the best I can tell, that does not work. And so these have to be declared before this runs.
Okay.
I'm sure there's something in the framework or reason behind that. The way this operates is that this whole page must be loaded before we inject this into WebAssembly or wherever it needs to run. So just know that this is the order, that this should be the last script file you load. Any script files that you want need to come before it. Even though the documentation shows otherwise, it just doesn't seem to work for me when I do it behind the scenes. All right. So just a word of warning there. So don't drive yourself crazy when you're like, hey, it doesn't see my JS. Why not? It looks injected in the page. It just doesn't see it because this thing loads these in afterwards. And if it runs after, they're not loaded in, the best I can tell. All right. Okay, not a big deal there. All right, so now that we have our JS connected to our app Razor here, we can go back to our home page here, and I can write some JavaScript code. Okay, now this is the specialized JavaScript code that we've been talking about. And it's called JavaScript interop. And this is how, if I'm from WebAssembly, how I can get out of a WebAssembly and call something in the browser. Or if I'm running on the server and I need to go through SignalR, how do I call into the browser? It handles all that. It doesn't matter where this component runs. We can invoke JS on the client. All right. Now, what we do is we're injecting the interactive JS runtime. Okay, and this is something that's built into Blazor. And if you want to use JS on a page, pretty much inject it right here, just like that. Okay. And then inside my code here, I want this to run during events. Now, I haven't gone through this a lot, and we will make other videos about this, about the page lifecycle of components. And they have some built-in methods that happen during certain times, on initialized. And what I want to do is write a specialized function on this page lifecycle, and it's going to be protected. And I'm going to override. And it runs asynchronous, and it's on after render async, right? And what this means is that once the page is completely finished rendering, do stuff, okay? And so this only fires after the page renders. And typically when you want to change how a page behaves, or you want to, like we do, invoke some JavaScript, right? We don't want to do that until after the page is fully rendered, or we could be trying to go after things that hasn't finished rendered yet. Okay. So I'm going to write a JavaScript function. So I'm going to say await, and I'm going to use JS keyword here. I'm going to show you why it's JS, because that's what I named it. And that's right here in this injection. I named this JS. I could have called it JavaScript. I could call it whatever. I called it JS for short. And now that I have the runtime in there, I can call functions. And so I can say invoke async. And if it returns a string, I can say the return type here. And then I just give it the name of the JavaScript function that I want. Now notice, I'm not telling it what file to look in or anything like that. It's just going to go look through all of the JavaScript that's loaded and find the method, just like it would in any other JavaScript file. Okay. Now, you probably, if you're new to JavaScript or you're writing a lot of JavaScript, you're probably thinking, hey, can I pass parameters to my JavaScript? Absolutely. You can just hit the comma here, and then we can add in the objects that we want to pass into it. That could be a string, it could be an array, whatever you're doing, that whatever your object that your function would take, you pass it right here. So it's basically the name of the function in quotes, comma, and then the name of, or the type of object you want to pass in. And that'll be your parameters. Okay. So you can call pretty much any method you want. That is JavaScript interop. That's how hard it is to do, Kevin.
Yeah, doesn't seem difficult at all.
No, it's fairly easy to do. So hopefully, if I've done everything right, we can look at our code here and see if it's going to run here. Hopefully it does. And let's save it and see if our... Yeah. All right, so that's what that is the hot reload not working.
So that's the error that it throws up.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's my machine or and I hope people will give me forgiveness. This came out on Tuesday. So,
yeah, and you literally put this together like yesterday. So
yeah, I put it together yesterday. So hopefully if this runs, and notice, look, it popped up there.
Oh,
so now this is our modal here that popped up. Okay, it's kind of grayed out, it's kind of ugly. But it did pop up. And notice here too, I don't have any code here for the close or anything like that. This is Bootstrap doing this, and boom, it works. So if we refresh it, it's going to call this method right here, invoke async show newsletter modal, and comes up. And so that's on after render async. Now you'll notice a delay there. Primarily that delay has a lot to do with that I'm running in development. Once you're running this in production, this is lightning fast. But in development, it's a little slower, maybe a beat slower. It's not like really slow. It's just a beat slower. But once you compile it down, these things are lightning fast. And we haven't announced this. We have a product coming out that's written in Blazor, and you'll see how lightning fast it is. Pretty cool. But we'll talk about that more on .NET Day in November. A little tease there, Kevin. That's what they call it in the biz.
Is that what that was?
A little tease. Kevin says, nice. You just guaranteed something. Don't do it.
You did. I'm I'm not saying anything. No, we'll be good with that.
We'll be good. All right, so now I have this all wired up. So now all I have to do is change how my component looks. All right, so let's close this down here and go back into here. And now I want to change how this looks. And so let's add some real markup to this. So I have some more markup here, and we're going to put some real markup in it. Now I will say this, the reason I'm not typing this in now is because I did spend a day maybe or more building this out and testing it and coming up with how I wanted it to look and everything. So I didn't do this all at once. Okay, but let's go through what I just did. So I've got a modal in here that I pushed back in there, and then I've got a dialog in here, and then I'm going to center it and I'm going to make it large. So this is built into Bootstrap. And then in here, I've got the content area that I'm going to make transparent, which means that it doesn't have a background. Okay. And I want my modal to be completely transparent. And then the things I'm going to lay on top of it won't be. And notice here that I have my modal body here, and I'm going to round the edges here. So that's got like this nice rounded look. And then in here, I'm going to build out my graphic on the left side. Okay, and then on the right side, I'm going to build out my form. Now, notice right here, I have a logo here. I've got some classes here, and then I've got the heading here and a subheading here. And I've got sign up today and monthly newsletter tips and tricks. Okay, and then I have this form here. Now, this is out of scope for today, but inside of Blazor, we have support for forms. And so if you've done any web development of any type, you know that forms are a crucial part of building out web applications. When we want to post information back to the server and do something with it, a lot of times that's done through a form, and this is no different. We can post forms back to the server and validate it, run it through processes, and come back with a result. So we have a complete form model here. Okay. Now, when we put forms together, just like MVC, we have to have a page model. So let's go ahead and add our page model. And our page model just says, what are the fields, what are the properties that we want in our form? And in this case, we only want to track the email address. So we just need one form model, okay? And so let's just do that real quick. And so in our code behind, let's write our first kind of lines of C# here, okay? And so I'm going to create a model, a page model, and we say public as, and I'm going to call it email model. Could be called page model if you want to make it generic. But this is C#, and this controls the type of information that we want. And in this case, this is a string of emails. And then we can also, using annotations here, and say that this is required. So it'll trigger a validation for us when we submit it. Say public, and we give it a type, and we'll say email address. And get and set. We've done C# before. This should be really familiar for you, but anytime you're using a form, it needs a model, and that model, you'll define it right here, or you define it in another class and just reference it. You can do it either way. I'm putting it in the page right here. Okay. Now notice here, this required is white, and it's going to throw us an error, but we can also bring in extra kind of using statements here at the top here to make it obey those annotations. So I'm going to say system dot component model data annotations. These are really powerful. That allows us to use validation in our forms. We can make strings of a certain length. We can make sure that it is actual email address, or we can make sure that it's a phone number or a zip code or whatever we want to do. This allows us to do that. I'm just making it required. So if I submit this form, this is going to be a required field. All right. Now notice too that I have a button, and it needs to submit here. Okay. And I'm not going to cover this. I will maybe come back and add it, but if I want to submit, I can write a function here. and just say void. I'll make this private, excuse me.
I do a quick question about your email model class from somebody here.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to know, Wesley wants to know, is there a reason why it is made nullable when it is required?
This is a string. And so every type inside of in .NET, strings must have a value. And if you don't do it, you'll get a warning. Okay. And so it'll just tell you that, hey, this thing could be null. And so we even though it's required, we're in the habit of just making sure that it's nullable all the time so that we can avoid some of these compiler errors that we run into. Okay. Even though this is required, we're just a standard practice to make sure that it's nullable so you can avoid some errors that you come across, or you can handle it yourself. You could set a value here if you wanted to. You could put a value in here that's default value, but it needs to always have a value for a string type.
Okay, makes sense.
So it's kind of a thing that we do. Now, I'm not going to go over this method, but this submit button would call this, and we're not going to go over that today. I'm not going to promise this, hook this up to like a MailChimp instance later on down the road where this would submit to MailChimp, kind of like we do at Coder Foundry. Right. Just to show you how that could kind of work. But for today, we're going to leave it blank. Okay. Now notice here, and then in our input text here, this is in green. These are specialized inputs that are built for Blazor components, and these are built into the box of Blazor. And they have components for a lot of things. And one of them's input text. They got date. They got all the controls for forms that you can think of. And these operate inside of Blazor, and it gives us this right here. Now I'm going to show you the power of this in a little bit in a second. That's even more powerful. But this is two-way binding, means that the value that's in this input box is the same value of this variable right here. Okay. Okay. So let's finish up our code here, and then I'm going to create another event here. I'm going to say protected void override void. And this is on initialize. So this is one of those events that we need to call if we want something to happen when it's initialized. And what we want this to happen is create an instance of this class. Now, a class is just a class until you make a new version of it. Then it's an object, and this needs an object. Okay. So what we need to do is just inside of our page model here is declare a new. And what I'm going to do is say model. I'm going to declare it up here. I'm going to create a variable here. And we'll just say public of type email model. We'll just call it model. You could call it page model. Then in here, inside of my initialization function, I'm just going to say model. It's null. Just initialize it, or new, excuse me, not null, new. Okay, so this will create a new instance of email model because this is of type email model. And then this allows us to reference this variable in our code, specifically up in our markup here, where we can say email model for this form is here. And then in here, it says, hey, look at this .email address. We've got a warning here. Hey, this could be null, but we're not going to worry about that. Right. So if we run this, that's our kind of our wire up. And pretty much when you're building complex pages, that's what you're going to do. You're going to create a model, and you're going to map it to a bunch of fields. I have one. This could be 30 fields. So you come back. Now notice here, we've got our thing here. Let's make it bigger, and it's not the best, right? So we got some stuff here. And so if you're looking at this, you're like, that's ugly. I got this giant rocket here, and I got this sign up today monthly newspaper, and it's down here. It's really big. It doesn't look anything like the sample. Any guess why that may be, Kevin?
I don't know. Something to do with the image size to start off with.
Yeah,
maybe
we didn't put any CSS on it. And so what I want to do is I want to come up here and I'm going to add a CSS file to my component here so that it's always set correctly. So I don't have any CSS here. So I'm going to show you how you would add that. All right. So I'm going to come here to the component folder here, the folder above this is at, this folder right here. I'm going to say add new item, and I'm going to say style sheet. And I'm going to find it down here, and I name it exactly the name of this component. So I'm going to slide this over so you can see. So it needs to be called the same thing, newsletter, and this is a pattern you have to follow. CTA, notice the same, .razor, .css, and that's the pattern. The name of the component, .razor file, .css, and when I add it, the solution went away here. Now it's attached to it. So now when it compiles, it'll compile this style sheet into the global style sheet. All right. And if we look at over here in App Razor, you can see this right here is our compiled style sheet. That when I hit my compile button and it's running, it's going through all the components and all their style sheets and pulling them into this style sheet here, which then turns around and gets hoisted up into the main application. And it's linked here. So I don't have to link in a component by component style sheet. It does that for me at compile time and puts them all in here. And that's why it uses those specialized keys or attributes so it knows what style goes where and who it belongs to. Okay. So this is called CSS isolation. All right. Now notice here, and this is of note here, that when you create it, it'll put a body tag in here. And I want to tell you like how this kind of works in a real short fashion is that any tag or selection or CSS or anything you put in here has to be in this component. If I try to override the body tag in here, it won't work. Okay. Because that doesn't exist in this component. This CSS is isolated to the markup in the component itself. So if I want to change this add heading and subheading and maybe this logo here, then they have to be in the markup. I can't change anything out of it. And that allows, that keeps from a component from breaking the whole site. Right. Only CSS it can break of itself. Okay. So if you have a bad designer, he's only going to break his own component. Okay. So I'm going to just create my CSS here. And I'm just not going to type this all in because I did spend a while doing this. Okay. And you can see here, I've got a lot of CSS in here that's referenced inside this component. And you'll see the result here when I run it. Okay. Now, I will say this, that sometimes when we change CSS, it doesn't automatically compile it in there, and it just did. I had to refresh it and did a shift refresh, and now my component sees the new style sheet. Okay, it was cached before. So that's how quick that is. So pretty powerful. So now we have a really cool component.
Very cool.
All right, now let's look at one more thing, and then we'll let you out of here. So notice here it says sign up today, monthly newsletter tips and tricks. Okay, so let's remember that. And let's kill this and let's look at our component here. These are hard coded. What if we wanted to like modify this component based on the page that it was on? In other words, like if I'm on the home page, I want the message to say this. If I'm on another page, I want the message to say something different. Okay. And so what we could do is pass text into here to change this on a page by page basis. And so that's what we're going to do. And one of the things that's well thought out, and I'm only going to show you one feature of this, is parameters. Parameters can be passed in via code. They can be passed in through query string. They can be passed in through forms. They can be cascaded down from the top to the bottom. You can call out and hit a parent component. There's a lot of things you can do with this. It's well thought out, super powerful. I'm going to show you how easy it is to add components to this. It's pretty slick. All right, so we're going to have a keyword in here called, guess what, parameter. Right, if I could type. Then in this parameter, I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to say public string, and I'm going to call it message. And this is the second message that we saw, our main message, get our tips and tricks. Then I'm going to make another parameter. So I can have more than one. I can have as many as I want. Send them in as an array too. I'm just going to do 2 parameters just to show you how this works. And I'm going to call this one title. So that's how easy it is to do parameters. Now, how do we use those? Well, these are now variables inside the page itself. So now we can reference these variables. So I'm going to come over here, and where this right here says sign up today. And this is what really geeks me out, Kevin. Like when I can do this, I can just do this, get rid of this text here, use my @ sign, I say title. I'm going to come over here and I am going to get rid of this. I'm going to say @ sign message. So now whatever the value of this is will be injected in this page at runtime. Now, here's the other thing that we want to do is when we're expecting parameters from a component, a good designer would say, well, what if they don't send me anything? What do I do? Okay. Right. And that's what I'm going to do. In my initialize here, I'm going to write some code to make sure that we get something. And I'm just going to write some if statements in here just to show you that we can write if statements. I'm going to say if title equals null, set title equal to something. I'm going to say sign up today. Okay, so this is the default value of the component. I'm going to do one more. I'm going to say if a message equals null, and I can set message equal to something. Sign up and receive email updates. I spelled that right. A bland message.
It works for the purpose of this.
Now, what's cool about one thing I did notice in Visual Studio 17 lately is now if you misspell text in here, it tells you, which is kind of cool.
Oh, interesting.
You know, so it's a spell checker too. It didn't do that before, but that's a recent improvement. So if you're like me and sometimes you can type things wrong, fat finger things, just to give you a blue underline, say, hey, maybe that's misspelled.
Oh, that's cool.
You know, kind of cool. All right. So let's see what happens. So now what we expect to see is sign up today, sign up and receive email updates. That's what we expect because this is being set at runtime now. So I run it, and then when my component runs, it's going to take the values out of here. And we'll let the on-render async complete, and then it'll pop up. Look at that. Sign up today, sign up and receive email updates. But kind of cool, but you know, Kevin, like what's kind of interesting about this is that if I was designing this component for real, I would look at the messages here and I'm saying, that's kind of bland. I need something more, something a little bit more punchy to make them like, make sure they sign up here. You know, email updates isn't exactly a great SCTA,
right?
You know, but I want this to be bland in my component design because I don't want to be opinionated on how the programmer should use my components. So I put something in here intentionally bland. And so what I'm going to do now is show you how we could call this from our homepage, pass in the custom message we want, and override these defaults.
Okay.
All right. And I think after we do that, we'll be done. Okay. So let's do one more thing here. And let's go back to our homepage here. And hopefully you'll appreciate this. Now I've changed my component. I've added parameters. And check this out, Kevin. Watch this. I'm going to hit space here. And it's going to know that I can put title in here.
Oh, cool.
Right there. Boom. Now I can just say join our mailing list.
Wow, that's very easy, isn't it?
Intuitive markup. And this is the benefit of having types. And then notice here I got message. And then I'm going to say sign up. I'm going to do what you need to have. You need to have that FOMO thing here to receive life-changing, too hard, tips and tricks.
I thought it'd be like 100% discount forever.
Yeah, if it was a discount, you put a discount in there. Yeah, so I misspelled receive again. I before E except after C.
Which isn't even always true.
I know, yeah.
You know.
English language, man, you know. All right.
Just to keep it interesting.
Okay, this should be capital T title. It's just not green there. And I'm going to go look at this. This is blue, so that maybe I named this wrong. Let me go look at our component here. I thought I called it title. That's what I did. Capital T title. All right. Okay. That's what it did. Let's compile it and see if it compiles. And this is another thing that I do is I do check to see if anything's going to compile. You don't have to run it. It compiles quicker. And so I don't have any errors over here. So I can go back to my component and or my page, excuse me. So not exactly like I want, but we'll see if it runs. We'll see if it runs.
Ben wants to know. Ben wants to know if it's a 100% of the project launching in November.
What project?
You know, the secret project we haven't talked about yet.
It's a product. It's not a project.
Right. Oh, no. He said product. Sorry, that's my bad. That's no.
100% discount on the product launch in November. Oh, that's what Ben says.
Yeah.
Maybe for Ben, I don't know. I haven't really talked about. We haven't even talked about it yet. So I'm sure we'll give away something.
There'll also be a free tier to this. So
there'll be a free tier to it. So everyone that's watching it be able to use it and play it. I will say one more thing about our mystery product is that it is a product. It's not necessarily coding related. It's nothing to do with the course or anything like that. It's just that we decided to go build something in Blazor to show you that, if him says, hey, what's built in Blazor? Do you have anything in Blazor? What's, name one product built in Blazor. And we're going to be able to say, this one's built in Blazor, but check it out.
Yeah.
So we think it's kind of cool. So notice that, look at this. It overrode my stuff. And there I have the life-changing tips and tricks. Join our mailing list. And bam, that's our component. And final thing of note here is if I go in here and look at the home page here, just to show you how this worked. And you bring up my home page, or it's actually in the component itself. Sorry. It's just checking here to see if it's null, and if it doesn't have a value being pushed in, it'll put the default in there. But since I passed it in through a parameter right there in line and gave it a value, this is not null. So it took the value that was passed in. That's it.
Cool.
So that's components, man. I mean, it's pretty slick. It's pretty powerful. I can say that we're really jazzed about Blazor in general, but like when you start looking at components, hopefully your mind is rolling and you're like, wow, okay, that is easier. If you've ever looked at React components and you've ever done it, you know what I'm talking about. This is just, I think, and I'm probably biased here, it's easier to do. It's more fault tolerant in that you don't have magic strings and those kind of things. And it's not you don't have to use cryptic syntax to do this. You just use markup. And even once you get a component and putting it on a page, it looks like an HTML element that you have access to. And it has access to its complete parameters. And this is just the tip of the iceberg to show you how to do this.
I have a question from Christoph here too then. He says, can you set it in the declaration? Public string title get set equals default title.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. You can do that. The reason I didn't do that is if I did that in the home page here or in the component here, then it would always be this if I set it in the declaration. So this is set up so I can override it because it is a parameter. I'm expecting a parameter. I'm just coding around the use case if they didn't send me something. But I wouldn't do it as a parameter if I just wanted it to be hard-coded. I would just put it up here in the markup. But here, and I hope it's not lost on people that these things are two-way bound. And so as it pushes in, it gets injected in there from another page. It's kind of cool. Hopefully that's not lost on everyone. But yeah, you could hard code the value in here and just set it right here. Title equals this, message equals this right here on initialize. I'm checking for null. And if it's not null, I set it. Or if it is null, I set it. If it's not null, I just take whatever the person sent in for me. You also could do validation in here, like depending on what they sent in to make sure that the parameter value they sent in is of the type that you're expecting, that it corresponds to what you expect. So you can do validation. There's a lot of things you can do once you can intercept these parameters on initialization and check them or set them or whatever you want to do. All right.
Cool.
All right, let me go back to full screen here, Kevin.
I can put myself back. There we are. Okay, cool. I do have one question.
One other question?
John J wants to know, any idea what we'll be building in Blazor on the self-paced course?
Yeah, the same things we've been building. So we'll build a blog, we're going to build a bug tracker, and we're going to build a Contact Pro. In addition to that, there'll be 3 other projects we're mapping out now. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, it's going to be movie list will be one of them. You've seen that we've shown that example already in Blazor, so we already built that. Then we'll build some other ones, like we'll definitely
build a Chef already.
Yeah, AI Chef's already built. We're not rebuilding that in the course. You can just take it in .NET 7, and then we may convert that to .NET 8. That won't be our first release. We'll just keep that in .NET 7 for now. But if you take the .NET 7 course with AI Chef, you can convert that to Blazor 8. It's pretty easy to convert over. I mean, it should. We haven't tried it yet, but it should almost convert over with minor changes. So take our course in the .NET 8 and then take AI Chef and see if you can get it to work in .NET 8. And it shouldn't be that hard to do.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, this was good. I like this. This is there's some pretty powerful stuff in there. That is intuitive is the thing too. I noticed that. It's like, okay, that makes sense.
That makes sense. It's easy to do. The other thing too, I want to talk to the crowd out there for a second. So if you're looking at coming to our course in January, that's the first cohort we'll be teaching .NET 8 in January. And you got to realize this is coming out in November 15th or 14th or whenever .NET Day is.
Yeah.
And that's when they have their conference, and that's when it'll be released. And so from November through Christmas, we'll be getting ready for the in-person cohorts that will be learning .NET 8 for the first time. And then soon after that, we'll release .NET 8 content on the self-paced course. Hopefully we'll get to that January, February timeframe with at least some of the projects. I don't know if we can get to all 3 of those projects I mentioned, but we'll definitely have something out there so that if you're on the self-paced course, you can learn .NET 8 as well. And then you'll be on the cutting edge. We'll be the first people out there with .NET 8 content for sure, because it just came out.
Yeah, very cool.
If you want to use this, you can go download RC2 from Microsoft. You can go look at their blog and download Visual Studio Preview. You can't do it in the standard version of that's currently right now, or you can just wait, and when it goes GA in November, which is next month, then you can just download the standard community edition of Visual Studio.
Yeah, it's almost here, isn't it? It's not far away.
Yeah, it's almost here.
Weeks away.
So pretty cool. So things that are built in the box, I mean, we will be covering authorization, databases, all that stuff is in this release. We didn't have time to put that together, but maybe in a separate session or some of the self-paced course, we'll talk about auth soon.
So Monet had a question, and I'll answer this with a a link back to another video. Can you please explain when to use each mode in Blazor 8? We did a video on this. You can go.
We did 5 videos on it.
We did 5 videos, yeah. On each one of them in individual. But there's one, the very first one of that series, goes through all of them and tells you exactly which modes. Yeah, just go look on the channel. You'll see them out there.
But in general, there's a link out there. But in general, I want you to think about this. If it's static, meaning it's just HTML content, there's no interactivity, you just run standard component with nothing in it. And it'll just run and just display the HTML. From that, when should I pick between server-side rendering, interactive mode render server, or interactive WebAssembly? I think you just pick auto always, and you default to building it out as a client-side application, and then the server side is just there for the first render. That's how I think 90% of the people are going to build these apps. The other way is only clients, only WebAssembly. I don't think anyone's going to build something totally only server-side render, because there's some downsides to that mode with disconnection and SignalR clients, and there's some limitations there. But it is easy to build. But the thing is, they've made this so easy, you don't have to choose now. Just set it auto, and you're pretty much good to go. And I think that's where everyone's going to do it. We will get to later on, if you take our course, we'll cover architecture, like how do you architect an app at a large scale? What's the architecture going to be? I'm sure that a lot of other people can have opinions on this. We have an opinion of like how you should do it, but it'll be building web API endpoints and then a service layer in between. And then you call into the service layer so that the server side component can call service layer and the client side component can call the service layer. Not change any code. And so I think that's where we're going to land. But as we get there, we will talk more about it. It's all I can say is this is hot, people, and you should learn it. It's going to be in demand. We're already seeing Blazor projects now coming through. And then once .NET 8 hits the mainstream, a lot of people are going to be using it. Yeah, people have been waiting for this to be ready for prime time. And so while .NET 8 is new, you got to understand Blazor has been out for 3 or 4 years now, and they've been running down this road every year. And now's the time that I think a lot of companies are going to adopt it.
Cool.
It's pretty hot.
Good stuff. Yeah, definitely. All
right.
We'll be back again next week to talk about something.
All right. Yeah, we'll do it.
Next Friday. So thanks
Keep coding, guys. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.